Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Christianity on the Spectrum. This is a podcast of around 12 years of ethnographic research covering around 600 long-form interviews with autistic Christians and data mining around 26,000 found on social media. On this podcast, we like to talk about the intersection between autism and Christianity, and sometimes just autism. And to facilitate one of those sort of just discussions, we have on Susannah Black Roberts, a AI enthusiast and and lover of all things new and tech, to discuss the phenomena that she has noticed and that I have noticed as well. So I think the genesis of this conversation came around because you were tweeting about how relatable you found the podcast, even though you weren't autistic. Yes. And I said something to the effect of, "Are you by any chance a graduate level educated woman from a large urban center raised in a highly secular context, now converted and have either co-occurring ADHD, OCD, or anxiety, or something like that?" And you were like, "Wow, yes, I am."
It was extremely eerie. I was like, yeah, that was really funny. And I had gotten really hooked. Well, okay, so let me just sort of say who I am first. Should I do that?
Yeah, okay. Go for it. For those who don't know, I'll just start off. AI enthusiast is probably the opposite of...
Yeah. Yeah. I am a charter member of the Butlerian Jihad. I foam at the mouth. Like this is my whatever. I can't even talk about it. Okay, forget it. Yeah.
So do you mind introducing yourself to the...
Sure. Yeah, I am Susannah Roberts. I was Susannah Black until 3 years ago when I got married, and I'm still kind of unused to my new surname. I am an editor at Plow magazine and also at Mere Orthodoxy, and I write and I do various journalism things, and I sort of go back and I live in New York City, but we spend a lot of time in the UK because my husband's English. And I can't remember where I first ran into your stuff, but I found it I think it was probably just on Twitter. And then I started listening to the episodes, which is weird because I am not autistic. And I've taken tests and there's nothing that would lead me to think that I'm autistic, but there is something about the way that you approach things and the kinds of conversations that you were having that I just found deeply satisfying. And I was puzzled by that. And I think actually it was even before the most recent time that I said something about relating to one of the Politics of Autism episodes. You were someone was trying to diagnose me as autistic, and there was some kind of, I don't know, quiz or something, and I took it and I got essentially 0 on the whatever the opposite of autistic is. I got that, except for being extremely driven by questions of objective morality and justice, and extremely sort of rationalist about that. And so then we had that interaction where you were I remember it as being even more pointed, but I guess it wasn't. It was the way I remember it is are you a high bourgeois New Yorker who was raised half Jewish and is now and went to an Ivy or Little Ivy and then converted? And I guess it was not quite that specific, but it felt extremely like having my mail read. And so I'm totally fascinated by that. So explain this to me. Why did you say that? What is this co-occurring set of tendencies, and how did you find it out?
Yes, so this is a great question, and one that I get a lot, and it mostly has to do with false positives in my research. So I do mass data scraping of social media, and I just pull people together, and then I pull out characteristics of those people's conversations, and I turn those into vector maps, and then those vector maps basically get put into a much larger vector map. And then I use that vector map to find other people who are doing similar things and posting in similar ways. So it's all statistical machine learning identification is the short answer. And I noticed I kept getting certain groups who weren't autistic in my collections. And I went, why are these people, like, why can I extract features from a person's conversation, their profile, the people they interact with, who they interact with, how they interact with them? Why can I take those features and reliably find autistic people, but then also find these other niche specific groups? And the niche specific groups all have several things in common.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is, like, one of the groups has ADHD. So they don't have autism, but they do have ADHD. And that causes some similar occurring interactions, but I've since been able to extract just the ADHD ones and just the autistic ones, and then figure out how to differentiate between those two groups. One that I have a lot of difficulty differentiating is OCD.
Which is why I have been diagnosed with OCD. So that is the other,
So OCD often looks very similar to autism in external presentation.
That's but so then weird. That doesn't really, that's so strange.
No, it doesn't. It just so happens that it manages to touch on very similar types of things that sort of funnel us and canal us down into similar cultures. And then we get in those cultures, and those cultures have this, everything's a loop, right? Everything's a reinforcing feedback loop. Once you get in those, you start to become more like the people in that group, and the people in that group start to become more like you. And that's sort of just how things naturally occur. And so when you get groups of people who sort of all get forced into these little boxes, and those boxes have predominant number of autistic people in them, the group itself becomes more autistic. And so this is very common in secular, well-educated households, because those tend to have very high rates of contact with culturally autistic niches. So Silicon Valley, very culturally autistic. You look at like lawyers, very culturally autistic. Or just like any profession, you go to Ivy Leagues or minor Ivies or other places like that, you will get a far greater concentration of autism than in any other place. And autistic people aren't great at internally sublimating to group dynamics. And so if they're in a group and other people are in that group with them, they will tend to not sublimate to the group, but the group will slowly start to sublimate them. And in doing so, we'll start taking on their traits.
Okay, this makes sense. And I can see how this would work in my case in a couple of different ways. One of which is I do have a lot of autistic friends.
Yes.
Like that's basically it. Like I have a lot of autistic friends, but also like my way of communicating matches at least to some degree their preferred ways of communicating. And I don't think that's just because like I'm assimilating to their sort of folk ways or something. I think there's something in me as well that taps into. But then the other thing, like I'm not a Silicon Valley person. I think that probably any kind of machine learning, including the kind that you're using, is like deeply morally suspect. Although I'll give you I do think that there are some things that machine learning is good for. This might be one of them. I will give you like a permission slip. And the other one is deciphering the Herculaneum tablets or scrolls, which I'm very excited about. But anyway, so point being, I'm not a Silicon Valley person. I like basically everyone in my family is a lawyer or an academic, but I am not a lawyer, but I am a Thomist.
Okay, well, there you go.
Yeah. And like, I've been like a hardcore hanging out with Thomistic Institute people and like bonding with Dominicans for my whole Christian life. And like my Christianity is like deeply shaped by St. Thomas. And I just love that man. I love him. And I think that he, I don't know if he was on the spectrum, but he sure kind of seems that way.
It has been noted more than once in interviews by other autistic Thomists that they think he might have, if he didn't have it full on, he was certainly grazed by it.
Yeah. And it's like, and it is kind of like the other sort of thing is I am a huge fan of Samuel Johnson. And I actually did some of my master's degree work on him. And he was extremely scrupulous, had super bad OCD. I think he was probably also a little on the spectrum, but I just found him like delightful and like my brother. And I used to fantasize about like going back in time And because he really, he suffered, especially with the OCD and scrupulosity part. And I fantasized about going back in time and bringing him like Prozac laced brownies and feeding them to him so that like his like OCD symptoms would like lessen, but he wouldn't like, I wouldn't have to like explain modern neurology and neurobiology to him because I felt that would like freak him out. I had like elaborate like time travel related plans to like help Samuel Johnson with,
Yep.
yeah. Anyway, it seems normal.
I mean, that is a fairly normal thing for me to hear.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so it isn't just Silicon Valley. It's basically, and so there are Silicon Valley autists, but then there are like the theology autists,
Yeah.
and then there are just all sorts of groups of people. And another thing is, if you are highly educated, you will tend to want to cluster with other people who can speak to you about your specific interest and specialty. And it just so happens that one of the subgroups of people who is most likely to want to engage in that type of activity disproportionately will have autism. And so, like, how, if you are only looking at externally presenting symptoms through the internet, and like the internet is very weird, it does very weird things to social dynamics, right? It flattens them, and it truncates them, and it morphs them, and it shifts them in a very inhuman way. And all of my data collection is through the internet. And so I'm not actually seeing autism. I'm seeing autism as it gets filtered through the internet prism.
Yeah.
And as it gets filtered through that internet prism, it twists and it stops looking like autism conventionally looks like in a person-to-person interaction. And it starts looking like this other thing. And this other thing is a sort of, it's a constellation of a whole bunch of very hard to describe nebulous factors that almost always manifest from autism, but also manifest from a whole bunch of different things. And I've been able to start narrowing down some of those things. And like in my research, the ones who false positive the most have PhDs or graduate degrees at least. And the cultures that they come from tend to be German, Dutch, Scandinavian, and Jewish. Editing John here, just listening back to this. I forgot to include homeschooled. They're actually my largest category of false positive. So those are the big four that like routinely false positive. And so if you're highly educated, also if you are from an urban center, because if you're from an urban center, you are far more likely to be able to find other weirdos in your niche. If you're in a rural community, you got the people you've got, and that's it. I
wonder if that's going to change. I'm kind of surprised it hasn't already changed, because so much of the socializing and normalizing that we do is through the internet. And so like, it seems like place will start to matter less.
I think we're on like a 10-year lag.
Yeah.
I think that's slowly starting to happen. So you notice that in Gen Z and like the ones before them. An interesting phenomena is like the propagation of goth culture to rural communities.
The diner goth piece. That was such a good piece.
Yes.
It was actually kind of incredibly annoying, but it was, yeah.
So that happens because of the internet, right? Yeah. So goth norms normally socially transmit from person to person. But the reason that these norms are far more common across Gen Z and in rural populations is because a lot of the people in rural populations live more of their life online than the people in urban populations.
That's interesting.
Just speaking as a guy who grew up in rural Saskatchewan on a farm, like especially in the winter times, it gets real boring. Right? And so you need something to do, and so you spend your time online, or you spend your time doing things like that. And so I think we're sort of lagging that by around 10 years. Most of my data is from 18 to 35 year olds. And I've been doing it for 12 years, so a lot of those people have aged out of that demographic. But when I first started looking at them, they were 18 to 35 year olds. So I suspect in 5 years, I'll start seeing less of the urban-rural effect.
Yeah.
But at this moment, urban-rural effect seems to, if you are urban and you aren't autistic, the chances that you will start posting like an autistic person are
Or higher.
higher
Yes.
than if you're rural.
Okay, so what
And
are some of those? What is posting like an autistic person? Like, what is this trait or this collection of traits that give me a flavor or an example?
yes, so one of them is there. Autism is very heterogeneous, and so there isn't just like one style. There are probably around 16 different styles that I've grouped into clusters. And
Mhm.
so I fall into cluster C,
Okay.
but I used to fall into cluster A. So when cluster A is like tend to be a lot of very young men, and they're very abrasive,
Uh-huh.
very debate lordy, very
Uh-huh.
upfront, will not let things go. And so you see them and they're like constantly badgering people
Yeah.
online and
Yeah.
be like, show your source, cite your source.
The key line memes.
Sort of like rationalist
Yeah. Yeah.
discourse norms.
Yeah.
And so that's one aspect of it. But like another aspect that's sort of common to all of them is a inordinate level of earnestness that you normally don't find in other groups of people. So a level of just intensity and seriousness
Hmm.
about your posting,
Hmm.
and a sense that you don't really care that other people find you cringe is the easiest way to describe that. The other part where like you don't care that other people are like, isn't this a bit weird that you're posting about Thomas Aquinas online? Or like
Well, see, here's the problem. I think I actually am quite sensitive to people thinking I'm weird. It's just that I like all my friends also are like St. Thomas posters. Like that's
yes.
not true. But I do think that like I have a much more of a sense of be not being socially weird. It's just that like the norms of what socially weird is are different. Like this is socially normal. Like
Yes, and that's why you false positive
yes.
in the research, right? Because you're the sort of, I don't care, I'm going to post about my Sonic the Hedgehog lore and talk about, I'm going to spend the next 4 hours giving a detailed breakdown of how the American Girl doll has evolved over the years and why the newest iteration of American Girl doll is a travesty and whatever. Like that's how autistic people tend to post.
Uh-huh.
And if you are in a group in which posting sincerely and earnestly like that isn't weird, you will look weird
Yeah.
to outsiders. And
Yeah.
so things like that false positive. And also common features. So autistic people often have social anxiety. They have
Mhm.
social anxiety that is downstream of having a neurodevelopmental disorder that prevents them from being able to read people or understand like what social cues they're putting down. and
Mhm.
and so that not being able to get that, just it causes a lot of social anxiety. But if you have social anxiety from something like OCD, the social anxiety will manifest
Mhm.
externally through the internet in a very similar way.
Interesting. What is that way? Because I don't really actually feel like I have social anxiety. Like my OCD stuff is not about
Yeah.
social anxiety. It's just about, well, I mean, originally it was about stupid classic hand washing things, and then it was about like scrupulosity stuff,
Yeah.
and it's not even really that much a part of my life anymore. But so what would those kinds of posts look like?
Yeah. So constant checking in for validation from other people from your in
Mhm.
group is a really big one. Constantly signaling and telling other people and dropping signifiers that you are part of their in group so they don't outgroup you,
Uh-huh.
and then constantly reinforcing those norms over and over and over and over again because you are afraid of what's going to happen to you if you don't.
That's
Yeah.
just that it seems really that just seems like sort of dysfunctional stuff that can happen, especially in political spaces online,
Yes. Yes, it is.
like the kind of purity spiral stuff.
Yes. Yep. And I mean, watching autism communities is basically just watching purity spirals over and over and over and over and over again. And like, so in online communities, there's a principle called the 1%, principle. And the 1% principle is basically 1% of that online population community generates like 90% of the content for that. And so a lot of autistic communities become hyper dominant, or a lot of online communities become hyper dominated by the autistic people in those communities because they are the ones doing most of the posting. And so if you look at online trans discourse and you look at online autism discourse, they have nearly 1-to-1 parallels for every type of purity spiral that they go through.
That's so interesting.
And online trans discourse is disproportionately autistic. If you look at gender critical discourse, is now currently purity spiraling a lot. And they are purity spiraling. If you look at the ones who are initiating a lot of the purity spirals, they tend to also be the ones who have publicly come out and said they're autistic.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. And so like a lot of this is a manifestation of like social anxiety and of a desire to not want to be outgrouped. And so even if you don't have autism, if you have social anxiety, or if you have a fragile sense of self, if you have BPD, or you have some other sort of condition, it will look almost identical when filtered through this internet prism. And so these types of things happen, and I like constantly have to filter them out of my data set so I don't pollute it. But
I don't think that like that rings less true to me about myself than the kind of like obsessive like topical posting. And then also like the other thing that like has really just been so kind of like refreshing and emotionally validating in listening to your conversations is I actually requiring that people be rational in conversation. It makes me crazy when like I can't like have a conversation with someone without it getting sidetracked by something other than what we're talking about. It's hard to describe it. Like the desire to actually stay on a topic and like reason about it is something that I really notice in your conversations and in the podcast. And I don't know whether that's another kind of false positive thing.
So this is another intentional, or this is another like natural downstream effect of autism on autism related discourses that you again commonly see in autistic communities, especially like when you see autistic communities self-organize in ways where they are not conscious that most of them are autistic. So like rationalists, for example, they develop these norms, and they develop these norms out of necessity, right? The norm of we need to stay on topic, we need to focus, and not only that, we need to have a conversation in a really specific way. You know, these are the norms by which you will engage. The norms by which you will engage. If you start getting emotional or if you start getting upset, that's like a bad thing, and you need to stop and things like that. And so this is a manifestation of autistic people not being good at handling social friction and not being good at handling conflict and not having the sort of social skills necessary to navigate those types of things. And so instead of requiring soft skills, you make hard boundaries and you make hard delineations. And then you also set cultural norms and cultural expectations for how other people will act. And when people start acting outside of those guardrails, you basically shove that person out of your community. And I mean, I joke that like less wrong is special ed for smart kids, but to an extent it is, right? To a very large extent, rationalist discourse is a bubble, and it's a bubble that creates norms and discourse norms that are protective to autistic socialization styles to allow that and to facilitate that. And one of the analogies I give is most people tend to be broadcasting and receiving on like 30 different social channels all at once. And if you have autism, you have like maybe 3 or 4 of those channels open to you. And so if you only have 3 or 4 of those channels open to you, and a bunch of other people in those communities only have 3 or 4 channels open to you, you're going to have to develop a norm where you're only allowed to communicate on those 3 or 4 channels.
I feel like, so I've never been part of the sort of less wrongly Dudkowski world, mainly
Rip.
because mainly because I am a virtue ethicist rather than a utilitarian. And so like the whole approach seems deeply annoying and wrongheaded to me. But I kind of like, but the thing is like Thomist message boards and like whatever, I was part of this very intense theology discussion group for 10 years where I met my husband. And it was kind of a Thomist message board in a way, like it was Protestant Thomists for the most part. And that it kind of did feel like a virtue ethics version of that kind of culture to a certain degree. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if that
And
makes sense.
yep, no, that makes complete sense, because so there's like, I'm doing a whole episode on this. I'm still getting my notes together on the different forms of autistic moral reasoning in their
Oh,
communities, and how
oh
those
man,
shape
I'm so excited about that.
those different communities, and
Uh-huh.
like the discourse norms and the ways those autistic communities build themselves and develop. I
Mhm.
I tend to vibe very poorly with utilitarians. So
Mhm.
I tried for a very long time, and was for a very long time, in the sort of EA rationalist scene,
Mhm.
pre Christianity. I went through some stuff, had to rethink a lot of my life and where being a utilitarian had led me. And that basically led me to being like, okay, I am going to start adopting new norms.
Mhm.
Now, I'm constantly butting heads with them, but I get along very well with the virtue ethicists.
Yeah.
Um, and so like these are like very distinct and different communities
Yeah.
in terms of the way that they think and reason, but they're
Yeah.
both very autistic.
I'm so interested in this. So Leah, my friend Leah Labresco, who you had on
Yes.
recently, I've not listened to that episode yet. She is like the very like special Pokemon of being, she was a virtue ethicist before she was a Christian, but she was super involved in like the less wrong community. And
Yes.
I don't like, I find that so baffling. Can you describe like some of the different, I'm like, I feel like there's got to be a kind of, through thinking about this stuff and through researching it, there's got to be a way to sort of like break the logjam of virtue ethics versus utilitarianism. But that might be a fantasy.
Yeah, I mean that I would love if someone figured that out. I have not yet figured out how to do that, mostly because a lot of the a lot of the problem here isn't necessarily different moral styles, but
Mhm.
different social cultures that emerge.
Mhm.
And so you have a I talk about competing autisms a
Mhm.
lot on the podcast. And what I mean by that is, people will say autistic culture or things like that. There is no autistic culture. There are a constellation of different autistic cultures, and a lot of them start from a seed of something and then grow in a completely different direction. It's sort of like, a tree that gets planted in different soils grows up looking very differently
Yeah.
over years of evolution.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens there. So I'm not entirely sure if it's like an actual issue just with the ideas, or if
Mhm.
it's a fundamental cultural incompatibility,
Mhm.
like you're talking about America and Japan, where
Yeah.
some things are just very different and don't and just will not translate over. So I before I haven't released the episode as of recording this, but I had just finished a episode with Christians for Impact, who are like EA Christians.
Yeah.
And so we were having a discussion about animal welfare.
Uh,
And I basically said that I will always prioritize human life over animal life. And that is the rule that I'm going to live by, because I think we live in an information constrained environment in which we can never actually fully know all the things we would need to know in order to make utilitarian calculations. And I think when you are making utilitarian calculations in environments in which you are lacking information, you are liable to make bad calculations. And so the best thing to do is to develop virtues and to develop maxims and ideas which form you and then go forward. But we were fundamentally butting heads over this, because that is like, what? Well, why don't you hold these things in tension? You know, why don't you hold animal welfare and human welfare in tension? And the answer is, well, I think that would make me not a good person.
Yeah.
And when I have to make a decision and I can't know all the variables that I would need to calculate it, I still need to make that decision. And in an information constrained environment, I need to do something about that. And there are autistic people that simply cannot sublimate that into their way of thinking.
Mm. But it sounds to me like you don't have a problem then with the principle of utilitarianism, but rather with any actually existing utilitarianism.
Yes.
Because of the information constraint.
Editing John here, but do you know who doesn't have the information constraints of utilitarianism that prevent them from knowing what to do and how to do it with the resources they have allocated? That's right, the Against Malaria Foundation, and this podcast is raising money for them. If you have benefited from my work or have benefited from any of my research or just appreciate the podcast, I would encourage you to consider donating to this podcast's Against Malaria Foundation fundraiser. As of me saying this, we have raised over $25,000, which is awesome. This has statistically saved the lives of several people, and I am just blown away by the support that you guys have all been able to provide me. It genuinely helps motivate me to continue making this podcast and doing this work. Thanks. Anyway, back to the pod. Yeah, so fundamentally, my beef with utilitarianism is I just don't think it works. Like, I don't think you can implement it.
Yeah.
If theoretically you could implement it, I'd be like, fine, whatever, do utilitarianism. But I just don't think that it's possible ever to actually do it. And I don't think it leads to building good people and building good societies. And so I think you need to do something else.
I think my instinct on this, which is like very kind of goopy and annoying maybe, is that like in the eschaton, there won't be a division between deontology, utilitarianism, and virtue ethics. And if you think about something like John Piper's Christian hedonism, like that is a weird kind of utilitarianism, like Calvinist utilitarianism.
Yes.
That's kind of like chill Calvinist utilitarianism. And I do think, like, you know, it's also this, like, if you push on, you know, the idea of the good, if you push on sort of St. Thomas, and especially the idea of the common good, they're actually, like, ultimately there is no conflict between pleasure and duty and virtue. Like, they're like, that's kind of a basic assumption. And so if you're like a hedonic utilitarian, and I think ultimately we are all going to be both hedonic utilitarians, virtue ethicists, and deontologists. And then it'll be beautiful. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It makes sense to me. But like the reason that I don't subscribe to utilitarianism is I don't think you can actually do it to the level that you would need to be able to do it.
Try to, it makes you into a bad person and leads to monstrous decisions.
Yeah, exactly. Like I mean, one feature that you will find in autistic utilitarians is that they are willing to bite the bullet.
Yes.
Well, just autistic people in general are just bullet biters, right? Like you will say, well, it logically follows that you have this horrible consequence because of your worldview, and it's like, so be it.
I mean,
this is
the one you did with the reformed girl, where like, why are so many reformed people autistic, was like, it's all about the bullet biting, man.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Yeah, which that makes total sense to me. I am not one of them, but I think that would be a kind of, it's like almost like scratching an emotional itch to do that, I feel like.
Yes.
And to refuse to do that feels like refusing to scratch the itch, or like cushioning yourself or something like that. I think, you know, my instinct is that if something like outrages your moral sense, you should pay attention to that. That is information. But that's a reason that I'm not a Calvinist. And it's also a reason that I'm not like a utilitarian, because I think that a lot of utilitarian calculus leads to things that outrage your moral sense, and you should pay attention to that.
So what if you have a neurodevelopmental condition that makes you constantly realize that your senses are often wrong. So your social sense, your social sense of should this thing be happening or should this person be responding this way tells you, yes, they should, and they never do. And so your internal calculus starts being like, oh, the feelings inside of me and my intuitions that I form about people are not super valuable. They don't indicate a whole lot because every time I try to go by them, they fail.
Dude, that is like so fascinating because like what you're describing is like that aspect of autism, at least, is kind of downstream of everyone, autists and non-autists, being being social creatures, being political animals, and just like shaping, like you get shaped. It's also like, I think one of the things that's been helpful to me listening to your podcast is that like I kind of had this assumption that autistic people weren't bothered by how other people perceive them or weren't bothered by social discord, and it seems to be the opposite, actually. And
yes.
I can see how if you were like a normal degree of bothered by social discord and a normal degree of, if all of my instincts are pushing me in the wrong direction, this is going to freak me out, like that would sort of get you to a lot of the sort of like autistic approaches to things, and that it just makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. I think the best way to understand autism is in that loop, right? So people tend to think about it like, oh, it's just a thing in your brain. It's like, well, it's never just a thing in your brain, right? Humans don't live on islands by themselves. We live in a society. You being autistic in a society or in a community shapes that community, and the community itself shapes you. And you, having an autistic brain, are going to respond to these types of loops that are going on all the time, and then you need to properly adjust. And like, I think this is why autistic cultures develop, right? Because of your social intuitions are constantly failing you, and so you develop a social culture in which you do not have to operate on your own social intuitions, in which you have strict rules set up and you just go by those rules instead of what your own body is telling you should be happening. Right? So if you look at someone like Ayla, that is exactly what she talks about all the time, is that you have these impulses, you have these ideas, and then you realize these ideas and impulses are bad and irrational, and they need to be rejigged and reconfigured to adopt to new things. And so like, this is especially where like Silicon Valley autism culture comes up, because another weird thing happens where autistic people there have always been sort of bars to power for autistic people, right? To get money, power, influence, you often needed social charisma, social skills, and a social awareness that autistic people often don't have. And that's not to say autistic people haven't gotten to positions in power and influence in the past. It's just the advent of Silicon Valley has made it much easier for us to reach and grab those positions. And so now you have people who have autism and who have autistic traits in positions of power who become power brokers. And power brokers in society set sort of desirable traits. And so you also have people who aren't autistic who want to be Elon. Right? And Elon has autism. And so what you have is a whole bunch of people who will start mimicking like behaviors, because those autistic behaviors are proximate to power, money, influence, and status. And so that is another factor that you have to consider, in that in certain places, autism has now become synonymous with like the 10x Silicon Valley engineer. Right? Like in my place of work, if you came in and said, I'm autistic, everyone would be like, awesome, you are going to be 30 times more productive than everyone else. And that's another like significant impact on these sorts of norms and how these things evolve and develop.
I have thoughts. I feel like we should do the OCD conversation later, just because I have thoughts about that, and I have to like remind myself. I'll like write down what my thought was. But what you were just saying leads into kind of an aspect of this that I would love to get your thoughts about, which is the kind of, I guess, like the autistic approach to AI development and safety and use. And I feel like there's something incredibly powerful and incredibly real going on, and I'm not sure what it is, but like one of the one of the many aspects is that, like, so Elizabeth Askell's Claude Constitution is extremely it's effective altruism. Like that's what the approach is. And or at least that's the underlying aim. Although the whole sort of idea of like training an AI to become a good person, it does have a kind of virtue ethics flavor to it. But I wonder whether there's I run it is the case. It's not only people who I seem to me to be on the spectrum who have this reaction, but it is very frequently the case that I have seen that people who don't have a visceral horror of the idea of generative AI, there there might be a little bit of overlap with.
Oh, yeah.
Like I don't want to be like it's I don't know whether that's legit. I don't know whether there's data there, but like even just the way that people, like I have had so many baffling conversations where like I'll be like if I'm having a conversation or if I'm reading something, I need to know that there's a person behind it. And then the person I'm talking to will be like, why does it matter if there's a person behind it? Like all you're trying to do is get information. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm trying to do. Like that's not how I go about my intellectual life.
Oh, I constantly have this conversation with autistic people about communication itself,
Okay.
where they think that the purpose of communication is to get information from my head into your head, right? That is the only purpose of communication. And I constantly have to be explaining to them, well, that's not why you do small talk. You don't do small talk to get your brain into their brain. You do small talk to establish relations and relationships. But if your brain doesn't fundamentally work in a relational manner or a relational capacity, it just doesn't bother you.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me at all, right? So the reason that I don't like reading AI stuff is I think it's like, it's not concise, it's often not accurate, it is often inflated, and I just can't stand the prose style, right? But fundamentally, if a computer wrote a manual for me, I wouldn't care if a computer wrote a manual for me.
I don't think I'd care if it wrote a manual for me, unless it was like a manual of Thomas. And like the thing is, like for me, my whole experience of life and Christianity has been this sense of intellectual gift culture and being loved by people who are dead. I think C.S. Lewis loves me. I love him. Like we're friends. I think St. Thomas really appreciates me and prays for me. And like when I read a book, say a nonfiction book, a theology book, or not, a history, like I do not it's not, there's no division for me. Like it wouldn't occur to me to like ask, am I trying to get information or am I trying to like commune with this person? Because those are the same thing for me. And so what like freaks me out about like AI writing is there is no person to commune with. And so it feels to me like the gift culture of human civilization gets like kneecapped. And that super bothers me, but I can't seem to explain it to a lot of people I'm talking to about it.
Well, I mean, it's like trying to explain a new color to someone, or explain what the color red looks like to a person who's colorblind and can't see it, right? How do you fundamentally do that task? I should say, just before we get on another tangent, there are lots of autistic people who are also anti-AI.
Yes. Okay.
And who are anti-generative AI. The ones you're interacting with are of a certain political persuasion.
Yes.
So the pro versus anti-AI autism conversation is largely split on whether you are left-wing or right-wing or liberal.
Makes sense. Because so if you are left-wing, I would imagine you would see it primarily, the primary problem being basically copyright stuff and theft.
Yep. So copyright, theft, environmental impacts.
Mhm.
I think those are a little overblown, but
Yeah.
the economic impacts, those types of things. It's unethical. It is, and it's not only unethical, but it's unethical and it doesn't deliver anything.
Yeah.
Is sort of the line of critique. Liberal anti-AI is more on the conversation about, well, I should say also in leftist AI discourse, there's also concerns over AI tech being used by the military industrial
Right.
complex
Right.
to do mass surveillance or
Right.
improve missile targeting or whatever, and
Right.
they tend to think those things bad.
Oh,
And yet the right wing autism reaction to it is similar to you. It's the thou shalt not make a machine in the image of a man
uh-huh.
type of
Yes.
idea.
So the
And
right-wing anti-AI autism reaction.
yes,
Yes.
it
Because there's
tends to
also
be closer to that.
yes. Because and I have run into these people and like those are my people, like the Butlerian jihadis, like the sort of
Yes.
like trad Butlerian jihadis are my people. But I've also run into right-wing Christian pro AI
Oh yeah. Yeah,
positions,
those are
which
everywhere.
and those are the ones that seem very spectrumy to me.
Yes,
Like
they
it,
are.
yeah, and those are the ones that I find most alien, to be honest. Like
Okay.
because I share so many priors with ugh, I hate talking like that. I share so many like I
Become
thought we
one with
were
the
yeah,
rationalism
I know.
discourse norms.
I felt like, it's sort of it's like finding out all these people who I thought we were kind of on the same page about like the value of humans as made in the image of God and the sacredness of language just based on theology and philosophy. And then suddenly they're like, we need to like take dominion over AI for the kingdom. And I'm like, that seems like really like that's just seems so cursed right there. That seems so, one hates to go directly to C.S. Lewis's That Hideous Strength, but one does have to go directly to C.S. Lewis's That Hideous Strength. And I just find that those conversations to be the most frustrating because I'm like, we all believe that Jesus is God and that humans are made in God's image and that there's something supernatural and mysterious about language. I thought we all believed that. So why am I having so much trouble communicating my dislike of AI, generative AI to you?
Okay, allow me to attempt to explain.
Please, yes.
Imagine you are going through most of your life with the inability to read people and the
Mhm.
inability to properly parse and understand people. For all it's worth, these people will seem like weird black boxes to you. You have very little knowledge of their internal state. You don't understand what's really going on with them. These things are very hard to understand. And oftentimes they're hostile towards you. And now you have another black box that comes along that's not hostile to you.
Uh-huh.
Fundamentally, you have one black box that's hostile to you and one black box that isn't hostile to you. Are you really going to get upset at the one that isn't hostile to you?
But isn't there theology, like why does their theology not kick in to tell them that humans are actually not black boxes and it's worthwhile to read a human rather than I don't
Because
get
on
that.
an intuitive level they are. Like, so
Okay.
you can tell yourself all you want that this is what it is, but your sort of intuitions that you have built and developed over the years tell you actually this is what it is and this is how it is.
Mhm.
The I'm trying to think of a good example of this. I'll talk about me because I'm not an anti AI guy. I'm not pro AI. I don't know. I'm in a very weird space. I have been working with this technology since 2015, right? So I have been doing machine learning.
Mhm.
I taught myself how to do all sorts of machine learning stuff doing this research specifically for this research. I used it as a excuse to do that. I have been reading the papers. I have been involved in these spaces since 2015 realistically and working with it. And so I have sort of been hand holding the tech as it has been growing and
Uh-huh.
evolving over time. And so to me, this is a tool. This isn't a person. This is a powerful computer. And that's the only way that I think about it. I think of this as an extension of my hand. Like,
Uh-huh.
imagine someone gave you really awesome robot arms. So you just all of a sudden one day wake up and your arms are 100 times more powerful than they were before. Your job used to be throwing a ball, and now you have robot arms, and so you can now throw that ball with 100 times the power that you had previously done, and your arm doesn't get as tired as quickly.
See,
And so it's like, why would I not
yeah,
just get
that
30 robot arms? This is awesome.
that makes total sense to me, and that seems to me to be like the way, like if that's the approach, that's where this stuff can be really helpful and good.
Yeah.
And I guess what surprised me is that, like, I know at least one person who's an academic who does like political theology, which is like something that I'm very interested in. And I disagree with him about a bunch of stuff, but I thought he was like a really valuable voice in the camp of people who disagree with me. And he's like all in on this. And I'm like, I thought I just like the kinds of things that he's doing are like theology essays, or like that's what he was doing. And like academic work in like Augustine, like Augustinian liberalism. And like, how do you read St. Augustine, like the Confessions, and not treat language and writing as something very different than he's treating it? There might not be a way to get me to understand this, but
I'm not sure I can, but the easiest way would be like, are you familiar with Martin Buber and
yes.
the I thou I it dichotomy?
Yes.
Autistic people, it's not that we're incapable of the I thou, it's that the I it space makes far more sense to us than
Okay.
I and thou. And the thing that emotionally appeals and resonates to you is like a higher order I it.
Okay.
This is, I mean, it might be like, I struggle to correctly articulate this, but I have never been able to grasp what an I thou actually looks or feels like. My entire world, as far as I intuitively parse and understand, is I it. I can understand that I thou relationships exist. I can understand that people have those with me. I have no qualitative sense of what those are like.
That's
So
fascinating.
it's like asking what color is infrared light.
Yeah.
It is a sentence I can't parse. Or like, imagine a color that doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. Right? There is no way for you to do that, because for you to be able to imagine a color that exists or that doesn't exist, that color would necessarily exist. Yeah. And so if you are in this state where this is sort of your intuitive internal life, and you are in like a perpetual state of different orders of I it, mm-hmm. and different priorities of I it, many of the resonating arguments that you will find in Augustine don't get interpreted through the lens of I thou, they get interpreted in the lens of I it. And you can talk about them and you can conceptualize them in such a way that it sounds like the noises they are making seem like the noises someone would be making if they are talking about I and thou. I can do this very convincingly to people. Uh-huh. I do this so often to people that they are often like, no, but you do know what it is like because you're articulating it.
You seem like you do.
I know I do, because that's, in order to communicate, I've needed to adopt these norms, but like I have no internal intuitive experience of that. And so when I come to, like, when I get Claude to summarize autism papers for me, it will do a good job and I will read it. And I think of that as like a person. Like there is fundamentally no difference that I feel on an intuitive level between Claude summarizing a paper to me and a friend summarizing a paper to me. Okay. At an intuitive level, these are identical things.
Okay.
I understand they're not identical things.
Yes.
But like personal essays, I would never want to read a personal essay by an AI. I just don't care, right? Because the purpose of a personal essay for me is to learn about other people's internal states.
But if
And
you want to do that, that's already an I thou desire.
like categorizing and analyzing an internal state of a system,
Well,
like in the same
yeah,
way
I
that I would
guess
want to understand the
what you
fundamental underlying component of an operating system.
okay, yeah, no, when like for me, if I were to read a personal essay, it would be to like understand the person, not as a type or as a or how they worked, but like to know them.
Yeah, so I don't know what that means. I
Okay.
like fundamentally when you say that, I don't know how to differentiate that statement between fundamental mechanical like underlying structure. How does the state machine inside of their brain operate? And so like for me, the internal question of how does the state machine inside of Claude's brain operate
Uh-huh.
is as interesting to me as a human.
Okay, that this is helping me. It's also very disturbing. Um, have you I have a
Yes.
question. Have you have you run across Ian McGilchrist?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Very frequently. And he
Okay.
is constantly brought up to me.
Okay. I just kind of feel like he might be the like maybe I have this hope that he is like the guy who breaks the utilitarianism virtue ethics logjam because his and I think that his ideas have to do with everything that we've been talking about. Although I don't know whether he would agree with that. And he is an actual like psychologist. So I feel like or neurologist. So I feel like he probably would have an opinion. You should
Yeah.
get him on. You should get him on.
I've
I
sent
want
the email.
oh
um,
like
Balls in his court. But
yeah. But
the
what are your thoughts about like
I think these are fundamental incompatibilities. I think so I talk about this with my wife. My wife is the opposite of autism. Uh, to give an example, my sister-in-law is autistic. She
mhm,
did not realize she was autistic. I met her for like an hour and I was like, girl, you need to get assessed. And it's very obvious. As
mhm,
soon as you see her, if you know what autism looks like in women, she checks all of the boxes going back to early childhood. Like she is, if she was assessed by a competent clinician, everyone would say this. I got her to do the autism assessments, like a
uh-huh,
bunch of autism screeners, like the ones you described. And she scored high in the range of autism
uh-huh.
for every single test she did. My wife scored in like the bottom 3% for everything.
I think I scored in the bottom 4%.
Yeah. We are, I don't know what goes on in her head, and I cannot understand it. I love this woman. I have devoted my life to this woman. But for all intents and purposes, we might as well be different species. I often talk about autistic mating strategies and how
Uh-huh.
some of us are like swans and just find another person like them and bond for life, and they're just this dyad that goes through life together, and they're basically the same person, maybe with slight variations or whatever. And then there are like the bonobo types who
Uh-huh.
are like the Silicon Valley polycules. And,
That's the polycules, yeah.
yeah,
We
and
have
then
those.
there's another type of relationship, which is the one that I'm in, which is, you know how you have like those crocodiles and then they have birds that come in and
Oh,
like
yeah.
pick the stuff out of the crocodile's
He's
teeth.
symbiotic.
Yeah, that's my relationship with my wife. We don't understand what's going on inside of the bird.
Uh-huh.
She does not know what's going inside of the brain of the crocodile.
Uh-huh.
Fundamentally, we do not like, we talk about our internal lives to each other all the time, and we
Uh-huh.
both every single time come away with, how do you function? Like,
Yeah.
how are you alive? How did you
Yeah.
make it this far if this is how you think about and perceive and internalize the world? And I think this is just one of those fundamental incompatibility issues where I've just given up trying to
Mhm.
understand her in the way that she understands me, and just accepted that we are in a symbiotic relationship with what might as well be two different species of people. And I think this is one of those problems, but on a more macro scale. I could attempt to communicate to you what my internal life is like, and you could try to do the same to me. And at the end of the day, we will both create a black box simulation of each other that isn't actually reflective of that internal life.
Yeah.
It is our limited interpretation of our own internal lives, but we just modify variables inside of it so that it comes out looking differently. But like fundamentally, I can model my wife's internal life by basically doing a black box simulation of what it would be like.
Yeah.
But I have no intuitive sense of what it would be like to be her or to perceive the world by her, because fundamentally something went down a different path in my neurodevelopmental trajectory. And because it went differently, like, for example, I didn't understand that tone had any informational value until I was like 12. I didn't understand that people were actually communicating this information. And still to this day, I have to listen to a person's tone and I have to manually think, they have changed their tone. What does that tone change mean? Based on all my interactions that I've had with this person, the tone change probably indicates sarcasm. Or that was a different tone change. Oh, they're being very serious right now and they're not being sarcastic. And so like when I first meet a person, I like the vibes are egregious, right? Like we tend to be off on two very different feet. And it isn't until I spend a bunch of time with them where I can like learn them and develop my own black box simulation of them that I can figure out how I'm supposed to interact with this person. But that's been my entire life. And I can't imagine what it's like to be able to sit in a room and sort of just be present with another person. Like, you know, how people talk about that feeling or like feeling emotionally connected to someone. I have no conception of what that is. You might as well be describing to me like a new emotion called blorb. Like it is fundamentally unreachable to me, and I have tried reaching it many, many times. And so like when it comes down to this type of thing, like I just don't think you will be able to model them other than to say, I can't model this person.
Do you think though that McGilchrist's sort of taxonomy, like his left brain, right brain, you know, which is not, if anyone who's listening to this, if you have not read McGilchrist, it's not what you're thinking about when you think about left brain, right brain. It's a whole other and much more sophisticated approach.
It's not the pop psychology. Left brain, right brain.
But it just seems to me like his description of left brain dominance versus right brain dominance is so closely mapped to this that it cannot possibly be a coincidence.
I think they probably are. I mean, my critique of McGilchrist is I think he kind of has hammer nail syndrome.
Yes.
As we all develop, right?
Yeah.
You know, when all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail. And I think he extends the left brain, right brain thing past the point of credulity. And it's like, historically, I don't think you are correctly interpreting this. Like this phenomena is actually a lot more complicated. Like the music theory stuff. You know, it's anyway.
No, I think that's probably true. I think that's a good critique.
You get into that sort of territory if you allow yourself, if you go like, okay, let me humor this and read it in its best faith light that I can, and like sort of steelman it. I think the steelman version, there is a there, right? I think there is something to it when you steelman it, and of course, you know, I just think he takes things too far in certain extents where it's like this is more complicated than you're letting on. But
I mean, in the way that like Girardians take Girard, like to talk about hammer nail syndrome.
I also have the exact same critique of Girard as a avid reader and appreciator of Girard. I think he sometimes takes mimetic theory past the point where it should be taken. Like I think mimetic theory sort of breaks down once you get past the sort of 50 people group stage. Once you start looking at sort of macro level forces, I don't think mimetic theory quite has the explanatory explanatory power that people think it does. But
I also think that his attempt to apply it to the crucifixion to the sort of theology of redemption is bad.
Oh, okay.
Real bad. But that's a separate conversation.
That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah. I should probably take off. I have some things to finish doing. This has been so much fun. And I would love to do the OCD version at some point.
Yes, we will absolutely do that. I have prepared the episode, so
Awesome.
so I have all my research notes that I will send to you. That'll be far more thorough than this.
Awesome. Also, I'm so interested in the virtue ethics autists versus utilitarian autists
versus
question.
deontologists.
Yeah, versus
I have utilitarians, deontologists, and virtue ethicists.
When is that coming out?
I don't know. Whenever the spirit leads me, or more accurately, whenever I get around to recording it in the pile of episodes and episode requests that I have out. All right.
Excellent. All right.
Cool. Yeah. If you'd like to find me, you can find me christianityonthespectrum@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter @ChristianityOn, and you can find me on Blue Sky @christianityon.bluesky.social. We have Discord if you'd like to join the Discord. Send me a message on either of those platforms or email, and I will send you a link. Susannah, do you have anything else you would like to?
I'm on Twitter at Susania, Suzania, and I also have a Substack that's linked from there. And I'm super up for talking with anyone who wants to talk about this stuff. I find it totally fascinating.
And you also do you still do the plow?
No, the podcast. Okay, so we don't do. Joy Clarkson actually took over our podcast. She had her pre-existing one, mainly because Pete and I lost our sound guy, who is Pete's brother. But yes, you should also subscribe to Plow Quarterly, which is the best magazine in the world. PLOUGH.com. And just go there for lots of, if you like C.S. Lewis and Chesterton and George MacDonald and all those, and Wendell Berry, and a lot of sort of slightly autistic Thomists, then you will like Plow.
Yes, and two-time podcast guest Ben Crosby has written for the Plow several times.
He has? Oh,
and Arlie Coles. Did Arlie Coles write?
He's not. Yes, she did. She wrote
AI.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
All right, cool.
Alrighty.
See you all later.